Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going deep into something I know a lot of you are thinking about a lot, the changing world of masculinity. You've had some great conversations about men's rights and the red pill, especially those hidden covert contracts in marriage.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there.
So we're going to take a close look at a book that really gets into those issues.
Okay, sounds good.
It's called The Restored Masculinity, Rediscovering the Lost Balance Between Men and Women.
I'm familiar with this one.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, the author really gets into some of the concerns you guys have been talking about online.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, he argues that there's been a real shift in how men are shown in the media and in society.
Yeah, definitely seeing that.
And he says it's been a deliberate effort to make traditional masculinity look bad.
Interesting take.
Yeah, and he doesn't just scratch the surface.
No.
He uses tons of examples like things from history, scientific research, and even stories from his own life.
To show how things have changed.
Exactly, to show how this shift has happened and what it means for men now.
Wow, so this is a pretty deep dive.
Oh yeah, he gets into some pretty controversial stuff too.
Like what?
Well, things like the whole beta male thing.
Oh yeah, that's a hot topic.
And then he talks about the influence of ideologies like Marxism and critical theory.
Those are big ones.
Yeah, and then he ties it all back to how these changes affect men's mental health, their relationships, and their overall sense of self.
This is going to be a good one. All right, so let's start with this idea of the emasculation of society.
Okay.
The author uses this term to describe how he thinks there's a systematic effort to make men look bad.
Right.
He points to the media, where men are often shown as like incompetent or just kind of bumbling fools.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And that can definitely make men question themselves.
Makes sense.
And it goes beyond just the media, right? He says that society is pushing a more gynocentric viewpoint, like downplaying or even demonizing traditional gender roles.
I see where he's going with that.
And this is where that whole red pill philosophy comes in.
Yeah.
Because it's all about questioning these changes and how they affect men's place in the world.
Right. It's like trying to figure out where men fit in now.
Exactly.
You guys often talk about feeling like those traditional masculine values, like strength or stoicism, providing for your family, like they're being dismissed or even attacked as being toxic.
Definitely hearing that a lot.
And the author totally agrees with you. He says that men are being pressured to suppress their natural instincts.
Which brings us to that whole concept of the beta male. Right.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
The author contrasts the beta with the alpha.
Okay.
The alpha who has all those classic masculine traits.
The classic image.
He thinks society's encouraging men to be less assertive, more emotional, more accommodating.
Almost like it wants men to be more feminine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And he even points to things like the fashion industry and the media as playing a part in this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like think about the trend of men wearing more androgynous clothing, or how male models are often shown as super skinny and delicate.
I see what you mean.
He says these subtle messages can affect how men see themselves and how they act.
That's pretty interesting.
But here's where it gets a little tricky.
How so?
He acknowledges that expressing emotions can be good for men.
Yeah, sure.
It's not about going back to the days when men just bottled everything up.
Right. That wouldn't be healthy.
But he worries about going too far in the other direction, where traditional masculinity becomes something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, finding that balance is important.
Exactly. And he really gets into some controversial areas.
Oh, like what?
Well, he says that certain ideologies, specifically Marxism and critical theory, have played a part in undermining traditional masculinity.
Okay, those are pretty complex ideas.
Yeah, definitely. But to keep it simple,
Yeah.
Marxism is focused on the struggle between different social classes.
Okay.
And critical theory analyzes power structures in society.
Right, I've heard of that.
And the author argues that these frameworks have led to this idea that masculinity is inherently oppressive.
Interesting.
And this is where that whole patriarchy concept comes in,
Yeah, that's a big one these days.
You guys often talk about how feminism seems to paint traditional male roles as automatically oppressive to women.
Yeah, definitely a common theme.
The author picks up on that and says these ideologies have kind of distorted how we see masculinity.
So instead of understanding it and valuing it.
Exactly. It's seen as something that needs to be dismantled.
Interesting.
And he's especially critical of certain feminist movements.
Oh, yeah.
He sees them as focusing on the negative traits of men.
Okay.
And that's contributing to a culture of fear and resentment.
Wow.
He uses the term gynocentrism to describe this shift towards prioritizing women's needs and perspectives over men's.
So he's not saying that women's rights aren't important.
No, not at all. He knows how important equality is,
Okay.
but he's worried that things have swung too far in the other direction.
Right.
And now men are being unfairly demonized.
An interesting point.
And traditional male roles are seen as inherently problematic.
Makes sense.
And this all ties into the concept of hypergamy, which the author really dives into.
Perkin.
Yeah, it's the idea that women tend to marry up in terms of social status and resources.
Okay, I think I've heard of that.
It's a biological drive. He's not saying it's wrong,
Okay.
but he's worried about how modern society has kind of amplified it.
Amplified it.
Yeah, and that's leading to more pressure and cynicism among men.
I can see that.
Think about it in terms of those covert contracts you guys always discuss.
Yeah.
You feel like there's this unspoken rule that men have to constantly be striving.
To achieve a certain level of success and status.
Exactly.
To be considered a desirable partner.
Right, and the author says that hypergamy, when it's blown up by these societal pressures, can really make that feeling worse. It leads to these unrealistic expectations.
And potentially resentment in relationships.
Right, so we've got a lot to think about here. The author has laid out some pretty bold ideas, and I'm really curious to explore them further.
Yeah, definitely me too. Well, one area he really gets into that I think you guys might connect with is the historical perspective on masculine.
Okay, yeah, you talk about feeling like society has lost touch with those traditional values.
Yeah.
It's like what used to be seen as good, strong qualities are now being portrayed as weakness.
He uses some really cool examples from history to make his point.
Like what?
Well, he talks about Julius Caesar.
Oh, wow, okay, yeah.
The Roman general and statesman.
Right.
He was known for his ambition and his skills as a military leader.
Uh-huh.
And the author argues that those were the very things that allowed Caesar to rise to power and really change history.
I can see how that ties into the alpha male idea.
Exactly.
It's about having those traits that were traditionally associated with leadership and success.
He also talks about Augustus,
Okay.
Caesar's adopted son,
Right.
who helped to establish the Roman Empire.
Big shoes to fill.
Yeah. Augustus was known for his discipline, his strategic thinking, his ability to maintain order and stability.
So those were the things that allowed Rome to last for so long.
That's what he argues.
Interesting.
He even compares these to traditional family structures,
Oh, really?
like those in Edo period Japan,
Okay.
where the nuclear family was super important and keeping society harmonious was the goal. He sees a decline in those values in modern society.
And he's saying that's part of the problem.
Yeah, he thinks it's led to some of the issues we see today.
You know, a lot of you in the subreddit talk about how important family is.
Yeah.
That desire to build a stable and loving home for your wives and kids.
It seems like the author's on the same page.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
He also talks about chivalry.
Ooh, that's a tough one these days.
I know, right?
That's his take on it.
Well, he says that at its core, chivalry is about protecting and respecting women.
Okay.
Not about controlling them.
Right.
He sees it as a really important masculine virtue that's been unfairly attacked in modern times.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys struggle with that.
In what way?
Well, you want to treat women with respect and be considerate.
Right.
But you don't want to seem weak or submissive.
I hear you.
It's like society tells you to be chivalrous,
Yeah.
but then criticizes those same actions as being patronizing or...
It's a mixed message for sure.
Totally.
He gets that.
Does he offer any advice?
Yeah, he gives specific examples of chivalrous acts he thinks guys should do.
What?
Like opening doors for women,
Right.
offering your seat on the bus or train,
Those classic things.
and protecting them from harm.
Right.
He says these things aren't about putting women on a pedestal.
Yeah.
They're about showing respect and consideration.
Basically being a gentleman.
Exactly.
Old school.
He also talks about the importance of standing up for what's right,
Okay.
even when it's not popular.
Yeah.
He sees that as a core part of being a man.
Uh-huh.
Having the courage to speak your mind and stand up for your value.
This goes back to that red pill idea of not being afraid to question things right.
Right.
Like being willing to stand up for what you believe in,
Exactly. Even if it goes against the grain.
even if everyone else thinks you're wrong.
Exactly. He sees a decline in that willingness to stand up for what you believe in.
And that's a problem.
He thinks it's led to a culture where people are too complacent and apathetic.
Yeah, that makes sense. So he's made a case for how important traditional masculinity has been throughout history.
Right.
And he's pointed out some key virtues he thinks are super important.
Yeah, but he also knows we live in a different world now.
Right.
Things have changed. So how does he reconcile those old school values with the way things are today?
That's the million-dollar question.
He gets into how boys are being raised these days and the messages they're getting about what it means to be a man.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
He's particularly worried about the impact of societal changes on young men as they're developing.
You know, a lot of the conversations online are about being a dad and wanting to raise sons who are strong, confident, well-adjusted.
Makes sense.
I bet this part of the book will really speak to them.
He talks about this concept of neuroplasticity.
Okay.
It's basically the brain's ability to change and adapt over time. And he says that the norms of society are literally rewiring the brains of young men.
Wiring.
Yeah, pushing them away from traditional masculine behavior.
Wow.
And towards more passive, more accommodating roles.
That's a pretty big statement.
It is.
What kind of evidence does he use to back that up?
Well, he talks about the effects of too much screen time.
Okay, everyone's talking about that these days.
Then there's the exposure to certain chemicals in the environment and the fact that kids aren't playing the way they used to.
Yeah, things are different now.
He argues that these things are making boys less physically,
Okay.
less likely to take risks,
Interesting.
and even affecting their ability to focus and concentrate.
It's funny because a lot of guys online talk about feeling bombarded with messages telling them to be less masculine.
Yeah, like they should be more sensitive and emotional.
Right. More in touch with their feminine side.
But then they feel like they're also being judged for not being assertive enough
Exactly. Or not being successful enough.
or not fitting into those traditional provider roles.
Look at no-win situation.
He calls it a confusing double standard.
It really is.
He talks about the mixed messages boys are getting,
Yeah.
and he thinks it's creating a generation of men who don't know where they belong. They're told to reject traditional masculinity, but then they're held to those same standards when it comes to things like dating and relationships.
That's rough.
It's like setting them up for failure.
He also talks about the rise of casual sex, right?
Yeah, he calls it sexual promiscuity.
And how it's affecting young men's mental health and relationships.
He thinks the hookup culture
Yeah, with all the dating apps and social media,
is creating a disconnect between sex and intimacy.
leaving guys feeling empty.
That's definitely a theme in the red pill community.
It's like those old school courtship rituals have disappeared.
And men are being encouraged to have casual sex without any real emotional connection.
He's saying that can make it hard to build meaningful relationships.
Right, it creates a sense of detachment.
It makes it tough to commit.
It's another way he sees traditional masculinity being undermined.
Because men are being discouraged from pursuing serious relationships and starting families.
He's painted a pretty tough picture of what men are up against today.
Yeah, it sounds like it, but he doesn't just leave us hanging, does he?
He does offer some hope, though.
Okay.
He thinks men need to reclaim their masculine identity and rediscover the good parts of those traditional virtues.
I'm not trying to go back in time or anything.
No, it's more about adapting those values to the world we live in now.
So like how to be a man in the 21st century.
Exactly, but without losing those core principles that have always defined what it means to be a man.
I like that.
He talks about male leadership, not just in family.
But like in society as a whole.
Exactly, he argues that men naturally want to lead.
Okay.
But that instinct has been suppressed.
So what's the result of that?
Well, he thinks it's created a void in leadership.
And that's hurting everyone.
That's his argument.
Interesting.
He uses guys like Theodore Roosevelt as an example.
Teddy.
The president known for being bold and his commitment to protecting the environment.
Yeah.
And John Wayne,
The Duke.
the classic Hollywood tough guy.
He sees them as embodying those traditional masculine virtues.
Yeah, things like courage, strength, a willingness to protect others.
Those are the kinds of role models he thinks we're missing today.
It all ties back to what we were talking about with the red pill stuff.
Yeah. That feeling that men are being told to step back and not take charge.
Exactly. It's like society wants men to be passive and let women lead.
But then men get criticized for not being assertive enough.
Or not being real men.
It's a lose-lose situation.
He says men need to reclaim their place as leaders.
Not in a controlling way though, right?
Yeah. No, not at all. It's more about recognizing the strength and abilities men bring to the table.
So it's about balance.
Yeah, creating a more harmonious society.
Makes sense, but how do men actually do that?
He talks a lot about mentoring.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking about that.
He thinks boys need good male role models.
People they can look up to.
Men who can teach them about responsibility, hard work, standing up for what's right.
Yeah, you know, a lot of guys online talk about feeling lost.
Like they don't have anyone to guide them.
They're trying to figure out what it means to be a man in a world that doesn't seem to value traditional masculinity.
He gets that.
And he thinks mentoring can help.
He says it can be super powerful.
How so?
It can give young men the support and guidance they need.
To deal with those challenges and become strong and confident.
He also talks about brotherhood.
That sense of camaraderie.
Yeah, men coming together to support each other, sharing their experience, helping each other grow.
There's a real need for that these days.
He uses examples like the Spartan warriors,
Oh, wow, okay.
fighting side by side in battle, and the American founding fathers.
Working together to create a new nation.
Those bonds of brotherhood were crucial for them to achieve great things.
I think a lot of guys are searching for that today.
That feeling of belonging.
Being part of a group of men who share your values and goals.
He says men need spaces where they can just be themselves.
No judgment.
No pressure to conform.
That sounds healthy.
It's about reconnecting with that masculine essence.
And building those strong bonds that have been lost.
Okay, so we've talked about leadership, mentoring, brotherhood.
What about that drive to achieve?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
How does that fit in?
He says it's in our biology.
Part of our evolution.
It's what's pushed men to build civilizations, explore new places, create art and innovation.
That fire in your gut.
The desire to conquer and make your mark on the world.
But it can go too far right.
He says it can be a double-edged sword.
If you're not careful, it can turn into workaholism.
Neglecting your relationship.
Sacrificing everything for success.
So it's about finding that balance.
Being driven, but also taking care of yourself and the people you love.
Living a good life.
Not just chasing achievement.
He encourages men to find meaning in their work.
Setting realistic goals.
Prioritizing their time.
Remembering that success isn't the only thing that matters.
He's also big on physical strength and fitness.
Not just about looking good, right?
It's about feeling good.
Having the energy to handle whatever life throws at you.
He thinks physical strength is a core part of masculinity.
It builds discipline, resilience, confidence.
All important qualities for men.
What does he recommend?
Find activities you enjoy.
Like weightlifting, martial arts, team sports,
Or just being active outdoors.
connecting with your body, pushing your limits.
Feeling that sense of accomplishment.
I think a lot of guys are already into that.
He also talks about the differences between men and women.
Yeah, biologically.
He says those differences are real and important.
And they've shaped how we act throughout history.
He doesn't like the idea of erasing those differences.
He thinks it hurts both men and women.
It's not about saying one is better than the other.
Right.
It's about recognizing and respecting our unique strengths.
Working together to create a better world.
And this all leads to his idea of a masculine revolution.
Okay, what does that even mean?
It's a movement of men reclaiming their identity,
Embracing the good parts of traditional masculinity.
adapting them to the world as it is now,
Rejecting those negative stereotypes.
embracing strength, courage, leadership, responsibility.
Basically, be the best man you can be.
Exactly. He wants men to be proud of being men,
See it as a source of power.
not something to be ashamed of.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners?
Traditional masculine values are still important.
They're not outdated.
They just need to be understood and expressed in a healthy way.
It's all about balance.
Strength and sensitivity, assertiveness and compassion.
Being a good man.
And remembering that you're not alone in this.
There are other guys out there going through the same things.
And there's help available.
If you want to learn more, check out the Restored Masculinity.
By author's name.
It'll make you think.
And inspire you to reclaim your power.
You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Definitely worth a read.
This has been an amazing deep dive.
Tons to think about.
I hope it's given you a lot to consider.
Until next time.
Keep those minds sharp and never stop questioning.